Antique TV shows are everywhere, more than ever before. From Antiques Roadshow to Bargain Hunt to Salvage Hunters, they're keeping antiques in the public eye. But are they actually helping dealers by generating interest and sales, or are they hurting them by setting false expectations and cutting into profits? That's the big question we're tackling today. Over the years, I've had this discussion with many dealers. It's always interesting to get those different perspectives. And what's even more interesting about it is that it actually gets you thinking about a bigger subject, one that we all need to be thinking about, which is what's the future of the antiques trade. Now, my hope is this video just gets people thinking, talking, discussing. Ultimately, anyone who works in antiques, what's in all of our interests is a thriving antiques trade. So if a video or discussion like this can have any small impact, I think it's worth doing. Now, before I get into it, just want to introduce myself to anyone new. My name is Kieran Hughes Jones. I run taliesinantiques.com. That's where I sell all my items, and I also have a shop in an antique centre. I've also sold in all sorts of different places over the years. So let's get back to the question of this video, which is ultimately, do antique TV shows help or do they hinder antique dealers? And when I'm talking about antique dealers, I'm talking about anyone who tries to make a living or a little bit of extra income from the trade, whether that be online, fairs, shops, wherever you sell your items. So I've got three overarching against against the debate, and we'll go into each one. And look, if you're interested in this discussion, if it affects you in any way, I suggest watching the whole video because we're going to cover a lot of ground. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first point to say yes outright, the TV shows are good for dealers, is exposure. So I've been looking up some viewing figures, particularly on the two most popular antique TV shows, which is Antique Roadshow and Bargain Hunt. Antiques Roadshow is getting between 3 to 5 million viewers each time. Bargain Hunt is getting 1.5 million daily viewers, making it one of the strongest, if not the strongest, daytime TV show. Now, I'm no expert on TV viewing figures, but they seem pretty strong to me, especially for the UK. And look, the point here is that each time someone watches that show, is they're being reminded that antiques exist. Go out there and go and find some, and that's got to be a good thing. So if you think of it like advertising, now big brands will spend millions just to make sure that you as a consumer remember and have their brand and their name at the front of your memory. So if you think of it like that, then all these antique shows, especially ones pulling in millions, I'm sure the other shows are pulling in good viewing figures as well for whatever channel they're on. That's got to be a good thing. And another positive off the back of that is most, if not all, dealers probably got their spark and passion from antiques from watching these TV shows. So in my mind, these are all really good things for the trade and definitely the first positive to mention. Okay, number two is education. So with antiques, you get general dealers, you get specialist dealers. So a general dealer, probably someone more like me who buys and sells a wide range of things, but not everything. Whereas you get some dealers who are very specialised. They may specialise in furniture, they may specialise in Chinese porcelain, whatever, and they will just sell those items. And in my opinion, there's no antiques expert as such. There are experts in specific fields, but the actual, antiques as a whole is so broad, it's pretty much impossible for anyone to be an expert across the board. There are going to be some exceptions with people who are very experienced and have a lot of knowledge in every area, but I doubt they would say they're an expert in everything. So that's an important point, and it just means that when we as dealers are looking for inspiration, or we want to learn more, we want to get more information about the trade, we have several options. We can go to books, we can watch, we can try and find things on places like YouTube. You can look many different places. But look, the antique TV shows are going to be a massive part of that. They are going to be great ways to get yourself educated. And what happens is when we are buying, we might see something that we saw on one of these TV shows that we look back to and say, yeah, that's a good buy. That's going to be good for me to make a profit on. So the point's as simple as that. They are good for education, and that's got to be good for dealers. Okay, so the next positive impact that TV shows have on dealers is saving history. Now, if you think about antiques by their very nature, they get passed on from generation to generation to generation. And every time that part of the process happens, when someone goes into a home to clear the house, probably of a passed away relative, they are ultimately going to be throwing a lot of stuff away. Now, the antique TV shows have done a lot to raise awareness of the fact that people actually keep historic items, important items in their home, and that anyone could have something more valuable than they realise at home. So that's a really important point, and that is definitely good for the trade because it's saving history, it's saving more items. Now, some cynical people will say, well, is that good for the trade? Because antique dealers like getting things as cheap as possible. And I will come on to that point when I go into the other side of the debate. But I'm sure that every dealer would agree that it's a lot better for these items to be saved and then for this person to, expect more money for their item than for it to be lost forever. And that is an important point. Antique TV shows have definitely raised awareness about the fact that people have antiques in their homes, and that's a good thing for everyone. And look, if there's any purpose we have apart from making a profit, and this goes to anyone in the trade, not just dealers, then it's got to be that we do preserve history, we do save items from being thrown away. And as a result, many important things can now be cherished and appreciated for what they are. Okay, so there's 3 positive impacts that the TV shows have on dealers. I'm sure there's plenty more. If you can think of any, please leave a comment to let me know and anyone else who's interested. We will now move on to the negative impacts that TV shows have on dealers. Okay, so the first point is the decline in trade. Now, we've already looked at the antique viewing figures on these TV shows do seem pretty strong. However, there is strong growing evidence that the antiques trade in the UK is going the opposite way. It's on the decline. Now, I found this chart, which was from the United Nations Statistical Division, and it's a forecast of importing antiques now over the next few years. And as you can see, there's a significant reduction in antique imports to the UK. That is a strong suggestion that antiques are not going to be as popular as they are now in the next few years. They're already on the decline. Alongside that, there is a report from the British Art Market report from 2023, and they're highlighting that there is actually, in the last 10 years, 31% increase in antique and art dealers. Now, that may sound like a positive thing, but it does actually seem more like there's more and more dealers now competing for a smaller and smaller percentage of the market, which is a concern. Now, where do the TV shows come into this point? Well, earlier on, I was saying that the exposure is definitely a positive thing. However, what we got to ask is, well, why isn't that necessarily translating into sales? And does it mean that the people watching it are not because they're interested in antiques? It's because they just like the entertainment value. And I think there is something in that. Now, in my opinion, there are certain shows, antique TV shows, where the financial aspect is what the whole TV show is about. And I think the point there is that they're making it about the treasure hunt. Now, I love the treasure hunt as much as anyone else, but my first passion is the antique. And I think this is possibly what's being lost. That instead of these TV shows helping the trade by making people more and more interested in the fact that, that how amazing these antiques are, the story behind them, this quality, the craft, things that you just wouldn't get these days. It's just amazing that they still survive over 100 years later. The entire focus of a lot of these shows is just about, well, how much money can you make? What have you found? Oh, actually, that you thought it was worth nothing, but it's worth this much. So it's possible that instead of creating, antique collectors and connoisseurs, what it's creating is bargain hunters. And that leads me nicely on to my next point. Okay, so the next point is that question that every dealer hears every day. There's probably those of you watching this shouting it at the screen, which is, what's the best price? That famous question that David Dickinson coined on his TV show. And the thing is, that has carried on. This idea and how they portray the antiques trade on TV of it all being about haggling, and that's something that we all love to do all the time. Now, the point there is that that's more of a focus than, as I was saying earlier, about the antiques themselves and just talking and educating the people about why they're so valuable, why they're worth having. And look, from my personal point of view, I don't mind negotiating. I have a lot of stock, and I like to bring in new things all the time. So I also like to be selling and moving things on a regular basis, have a high turnover. Although I will say, especially with returning customers, people who watch these videos, anyone I can build a customer relationship with, they're people I'd rather negotiate with. What I will be honest about is, and this happens mostly in my shop in the antique centre, is when I do a discount for someone and get into a negotiation with somebody who it's interested in the item. I can tell they're actually happy to pay the price I've asked for. I've done a fair price. I do a lot of research on my pricing, um, but they're asking for money off just because they think that's what you do when you go to an antique shop. You have to try and get money off, and yeah, it does get a little bit frustrating. And many dealers aren't like me. Many dealers are a lot stricter, and they will say, no, you will only, the most I'll give off is this percentage, or I won't give anything at all off. And you know what? The question is, well, why should they? What other business or trade works like that, where it's negotiable, you get the prices down, you're knocking 15, 20% off all the time? And what's quite kind of frustrating is if you don't do that, if you don't give the money off that people are expecting, then it kind of sours the deal a little bit. They may still buy it from you, but you can tell they're not, a lot of time they're not very happy. Might not buy it at all. Not because they don't think it's value for money, but they just think that you're being unreasonable and you're not being fair to them, all that sort of stuff. So that's definitely a negative impact on the trade. And the thing about something like that is that it does portray and almost build up this idea that we're all a bunch of, buy it, sell it, that type of that type of trader. I'm thinking of a Del Boy trader, which is not the case. A lot of us have spent a lot of time researching. We're well read, we're well educated on the stuff that we sell. We have really good knowledge. I mean, a lot of dealers will tell you now. This is something I definitely experienced, and dealers that I also work within the antique center, they'll tell you that people just don't ask questions of dealers anymore. They don't come along and say, can you tell me about this item and the history of it, where did it come from? It's all about the cost, and it's almost like they think they can just get this information off the internet now, which is not the case. The internet is full of wild information which is not has not been checked or as thorough as accurate. I think the other point to make is that this can have an actual financial impact on the trade. Because if you think about it, over the course of a year, if I'm taking 10, 20%, sometimes more than that, people expecting more than that off on a regular basis, then that is going to build up and have a significant impact on my revenue. Now, look, I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm happy to do negotiations. I'm happy to discuss pricing. But I really wish that we moved on from this idea that it's just part and parcel of the trade. Antique dealers love it, and the thing is, some people might go into, when you go into an antique centre and you think, oh, that's priced highly, well, bear in mind that the antique dealers probably priced it highly because they know they're going to get knocked down, so it all has an impact. I think that would be a good development moving forward, is if we moved away from this, because look, I think it's absolutely fair to have a look at pricing. If you can get it better elsewhere, I'm sure an antique dealer will be interested in seeing that, but for it to be every single time, and if you like the item, you love the item, you want to own it, and you actually think the price is fair, then it does go a long way to actually just pay the full price for it. Okay then, well, the next point is authenticity. Now, as I went through earlier, the current forecast for the antique trade doesn't look very positive at the moment. But on these antique TV shows, do you think that comes across? Do you think anyone who watches these shows who doesn't actually work in the trade at all would know that actually antiques are on the decline? I don't think they do. I think the antique TV shows do give a generally quite an idyllic idea of what it's like to be a dealer or to work in antiques, and that's the question really, is it authentic? And there's other things as well. So I'm a bit loath to say this because the experts on TV, on these TV shows, and most of the personalities, if not all of them, come across really well to me. They seem like genuinely nice people, and they will have a lot of knowledge in their area. However, I do notice on a few of these shows, the antique TV experts are portrayed as if they're kind of all-seeing eyes. They know absolutely everything. Now that's not going to be the case. Say for example, the ones of them who come from auction backgrounds. Now the chances are, especially if they're younger, if we're being honest, they're only going to be specialised in certain areas. They're going to know a lot about that area, but then when they start moving into other areas, their knowledge is going to be kind of passing. But the TV shows don't always give that impression. They obviously, maybe I'm being skeptical and it's unfair, but it does seem like sometimes that they've done some research, they've been given research notes, and they're just giving that information across. Look, my point is, I'm not having to go with them. They're doing what the TV show is expecting of them. But I don't see what the negative impact is to say, well, actually, I don't know much about this. I'm going to do some research on it, and I'm going to take a punt on it. I think that's better TV and more authentic. When I make these videos, I try my best not to give off that I know more than I do. If I don't know something, I'll be honest about it. We all have black spots. Doesn't matter how much experience you have in the industry. A key thing I think about being in the industry is that you are constantly learning, and nobody knows everything. There are some people who know a great deal, and if anything, those people, and there are going to be some antique experts, people like Charles Hanson, Philip Serrell, people who have been, Kate Bliss, I'm thinking of as well, people who have been in the industry a long time and have a lot of experience. Well, actually, their knowledge should be, they should come across on the TV. It shouldn't be diluted by this idea, well, every single other expert has the same knowledge as them. They definitely don't. The next point I'd make is around valuations. Now, I was a big fan of Michael Baggett. A few of you will know of Michael. He was a leading antique silver expert. I believe he worked in one of the major, it might be Sotheby's he worked in. He was also on TV himself on Flog It. Sadly, he passed away very recently. Now, on his Twitter account, which was brilliant, he's a very funny and knowledgeable guy, but he would often highlight inaccurate values, particularly on the Antiques Roadshow. And the point here is that it obviously makes good TV to have a wildly high valuation of an item. The problem is that everything's in context, right? So either they could just be getting it outright wrong, which is what Michael was highlighting, but the valuations depend on many things, not just what get discussed on the roadshow. For example, it depends where you're selling it. It depends what the actual condition of it is. It depends on what the market is at that moment in time. And I think a lot of that is skipped over, and they just get a figure, and you see the person's eyes light up, and they think that's what they're going to get, or whatever, that's what it's worth anyway. And a lot of time it's not worth that. That's an estimate. If you actually took it to an auction house, the chances are it wouldn't be that high. And even if it is that high, the chances of it actually getting that price is another story altogether. So yeah, I think that's kind of the point there around authenticity, is that the TV shows do give quite an idyllic idea of the trade, and I think actually it would be more useful and entertaining for people to know exactly what's going on in the trade, and that also translates over to the items themselves, the point I was making earlier. Talk about the items, talk about why they're worth keeping, why they're valuable, and I would have thought that would make, that's going to be better for the trade overall. Maybe it won't make better TV. Maybe that's the outcome. But I genuinely believe it would. I think more people would be interested in the why than they would just the financial aspect. Okay, well there we are. We covered a lot of ground there. And I think, look, the most important thing for me is that this video was at least thought-provoking. It gets you thinking about this subject, but also the bigger subject, which is what is the future of the antique trade. And to be clear, I love these antique shows. I watch them and I think it's fantastic that so many other people do. Even if it is for the entertainment value, well, at least they're showing an interest in antiques in some way. That's got to be a positive thing. What I would say is that I think too many of them have lost maybe sight of where they're going. You can watch the old antique, roadshows, for example, and they're totally different to what you see now. And I think they were for the better. And that's the key thing for me. I think, if you're doing a TV show on antiques, for the good of the future of the trade, the best thing you can do is just be talking up the quality of the items and why they're so special, why people want to buy them, what's their history, what's their story, what's the craftsmanship behind them. That will cultivate collectors and people who want these items in their home more than just saying, well, it's worth this much, and then, taking it to auction and losing money on it. So, look, that's the key thing for me. I think that is where it would be beneficial. And look, let's be clear, that's good for the antique TV show. They may look at this, and say, well, it's not because it's not as entertaining. Well, actually, if you don't do this and you don't sort of, push the antiques forward, then the antique trade is going to keep declining by the looks of things. It's quite a worrying trend at the minute. And if that happens, then what happens to your shows? They're probably not going to carry on. They're not going to be as good anyway. So this is something that could be done a lot more. Talk about the quality of the item, the value of the item as an object, as something worth keeping, more than, well, how much can you pay for it? How much cheaper can you get it? That's my opinion anyway. Look, if there is a show that does this quite well, I think it's worth calling out, and I think it's Salvage Hunters with Drew Pritchard. What I like about that show is that, look, it can be idyllic. However, sometimes, say sometimes, that's unfair. I'll tell you, almost every time that Drew buys something, he is talking about, well, why he bought it, why people like it, what's the quality, what's the story, what's the history behind it. I think that's what makes that show a lot more compelling and is why it's so popular over the years. People are learning. They're not just learning about the value of the item, they're learning about why it's valuable. You know, it also gets you trained, it trains your mind as a dealer because it gets you looking at different items in different ways when you see a show like that. And that's got to be a positive thing in my opinion. That, you know, if more TV shows could be like that, that'd be perfect. Well, that's it. I think that's the point there. You know, let me know your thoughts. That's a key component of this. If you watch this video, please leave a comment and let me know if you think any of these points are correct, wrong, if I've missed anything you have to add, I think is worth putting in there. And ultimately, we just got to remember that the stronger the antique trade is, the better for everyone. And that's what we got to be moving towards. So thank you so much for watching. And if you can just subscribe to the channel, you'll see more videos about the antiques trade and my journey as a dealer. Thanks again, all the best. Bye bye.